Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Turning Point. My name is Shirley Plants and I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as U-Turn Youth Consulting Executive Consultant. Our mission at U-Turn is really to unmask the backstories that contribute to the youth and gun violence in our community, but also paying special attention to systems, disparities, and injustices that contribute to the backstory. So today, I have the privilege of really interviewing and hanging out with three of some amazing young people who are representative of the different communities in Miami-Dade County, really wanting to talk about issues that matter. For so long, we've been talking about, hey, COVID is coming back, and there's been a lot of talk about back to school. And my worry is not too many people are including the young people. So part of what we want to do is to include young people in the conversation. Let's talk about what this means. Let's talk about their fears, their anxieties, because as adults, we think we have all the answers. But the problem is, we're not the ones that's going to be sitting in the schools, right? We're not the ones that's going to be wearing the masks all day. So this conversation is really centered around young people, for young people, by young people, and hoping that at the end of this conversation, one, they can definitely be a guiding light to other young people that are getting ready to go to school. But more importantly, hopefully their perspectives can help us as adults be very mindful as to what is being said, how we're delivering the message, but more importantly, the rules and the regulations that we are putting into place, who it really impacts in the long run. So what I'm going to do is I am going to welcome each and every one of them, give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And since I only got one sister on here, I'm going to start with ladies first. Isabella, you can take yourself off of mute, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started.
Hi guys, well, my name is Isa. I am a rising sophomore at Miami Art Studio, and I'm also part of YAC West. I've been here for a little over a year now, and it's just been an amazing experience where now I've learned more about my community and I've learned more about the person I am, and I really do hope I can learn from this experience and be able to share with everyone what I've learned and what I also do hope to learn.
So Isa, before you get started, and I definitely want to send a special shout out to our partners at the Children's Trust, who definitely made this possible. Danielle, forever grateful to you for pulling this together last minute. One of the things that I want in this process is really to tell people about the YAC, right? The Children's Trust, Youth Advisory Council, many people don't even know it exists. I know you guys are recruiting. I know your new season starts in September, right? So I'm going to kind of ask each of you to talk about it, its impact that you think it's had on your life. Tell us what it is, how it impacts you, and how it could benefit some other people. So we're going to kind of use this also as a recruitment mechanism for some additional YAC members. So Isa, go back to you, and then I'll go over to Robert. Your turn, Isa. Tell me about the YAC and tell me how you think it's impacted you.
I'm sorry. So I was actually an intern at the Children's Trust, and that's kind of coordinating with YAC, right? So YAC, it's really shown me how connected Miami is. It really has shown me how there are so many organizations out there and how the world is honestly bigger than me. Just how many people are involved in it. I was able to be a part of a project for mental health awareness, and more so disconnecting from devices and the internet, since of course, beginning of COVID and quarantine, we were all on like Zoom and on our devices. So it was really hard to separate home life from work life when we were always like at work, at home. So we kind of just did that. I worked in the art segment of it. So that's where we just gathered at the park and just made arts and crafts. And then there was also sort of meditations at the park, like yoga and things. And that, just shows me how there are people who really do care about the little things and how it's not so crazy to just get one idea and just like, let me go through and let me actually help people. That's what it taught me. It's taught me that if you have an idea, just go for it. Go for your gut. And if you're scared of it or don't think it's gonna be an impact, it will make such a huge impact. So it's really taught me how, don't be afraid and how to really just get involved into everything that you are in.
Awesome, thank you. Robert, your turn. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, as well as how you think YAC has impacted you.
Hi, I'm Robert Diaz. I'm a rising senior at Mass Academy in Key Biscayne. My main interests, I think, lie in environmental conservatism as well as social justice. So I feel like, of course, naturally, there's a lot of intersection between social justice and a lot of other topics, but I think most so with environmentalism. And perhaps the biggest wake-up call to that was when I joined YAC. YAC does, as Isabella said, connect you across Miami, but it also gives you a sense of agency. So it's maybe something that I had never considered before, how those two topics were so related, but YAC kind of introduced me to so many different programs across Miami. And maybe Pedro will speak to this a little bit later, but I currently part of YAC Central. And our mission was facilitating political discussion, showing how the two parties can compromise, like without necessarily being toxic, without the conversation digressing into name calling. And the way that kind of just like happened to perfectly mesh with my interests was really awesome. So I think that was one of the highlights of YAC, how it was inherently, it catered to its members, something that I feel like if I wanted something that I was interested in, if I wanted to learn more about it, I had to go and look for it and fight for it. YAC was kind of the first thing that turned it back on us and was like, okay, what are you into? What do you guys want to do? It gave me a sense of hope. It was something that I never thought of myself as, type A personality, going out, getting what I wanted. But I think YAC kind of forced that onto us in the best way possible. I think it woke up my inner leader. And I feel like that was really important, especially as, our generation's getting older, going into politics. It's important.
Well said. And I'm taking some notes because I'm gonna come back around to some of the stuff that you guys have said, because I think they're going to be great basis to our conversation, right? Especially when you talk about the politics and the two different sides and being able to conversate without it being toxic, I think is really, really important, especially in light of the conversation we're going to have around the whole mask mandate, right? And young people wearing masks and all of that. So definitely gonna come back to you on that one, but great job, Robert. Okay, Pedro, talk to me.
Hello, I am Pedro Calendar. I am a rising senior at Biotech High School. Joining YAC, honestly, I feel like I've said this 1,000 times, but I joined my freshman year. It's about to be 4 years. Honestly, the best decision I could have made because, like Robert said, we kind of attack issues from all sides. We don't just look at one thing like the environment, political, we attack all of it. So being that young and being being told like we can't just focus on one thing, we need to focus on everything, and grouping with different kids from all around Miami, trying to find solutions for these problems, it just kind of like opens your mind. And I'm thankful for that.
Great job. So I guess I want to start with, were all of you on virtual school? Was it a mix the past year? So show of hands, who was on virtual school last year? Wow, so all three of you were actually on campus in person. Okay, so now I guess the question I'm gonna ask is, you guys were on campus. Did you have concerns while you were on campus, right? When you made that decision to go back to school in person, what were your fears then? And how do you compare them to how you're feeling now, getting ready to go back to campus with a brand new variant? Everybody's concerned. Delta has, the COVID virus has now, the resurgency has happened or is happening. So let's talk about that. So I'm gonna start with Robert this time.
Thank you, Dr. Planton. So I'll start by saying that I attend Mass Academy, as I previously said, but something that was a little scary when I was choosing the physical option was that Mass had about 60% of its students going back physically, whereas other schools had around 20 or 30%. Mass had 60. compared to Miami-Dade County, that was pretty staggering. So my initial fear was, well, we're going to be overcrowded. Mast as a school already is overcrowded. So when I heard around 60% of the students was going to be returning, I was a little scared, to be honest. But what made me push through that fear and decide to go physically anyways was pursuit of education, which sounds a little cliche, but as someone who did online studies at the end of sophomore year and going into my junior year, I knew that I wasn't the type of person that could necessarily stare at a screen 9 hours of the day studying and actually learn. I was taking the most rigorous schedule at my school that was offered for junior year. So I knew, for lack of a better word, my school year was going to be hell if I did not go in person. And I know that's not necessarily fair to students who were taking the same schedules as me, but for reasons of family, could not. And so I do want to acknowledge that I did have the privilege of no one in my family being immunocompromised. So I think that for that reason, the pandemic was a little easier on me, where if I got COVID, I would be able to quarantine in my room without fear of, my family falling death ill. So that was also one of the biggest reasons that I did decide to go back with the mask. When I actually went back to school, I spoke with my parents about it, and we decided I would try for a few weeks to see what the protocols would be like there. I didn't find them to be up to par, to be honest. I don't want to shade Mast Academy necessarily, but it was pretty disastrous. I mean, they assigned us every other seat in the lunchroom in order to social distance. But as soon as lunch started, there was nobody patrolling that. And if you know high schoolers, you know that rule was instantly broken. I mean, everyone was simply sitting chest to chest, it was insane. Another thing that wasn't taken into account was the hallways. Hallways were made to be one way in order to prevent traffic. My first concern was that even if it was one way, a ton of students going along together are still in contact. We were still reaching social distance. Secondly, again, nobody was supervising the hallways. So often students ended up cutting through the other way anyways. And it was almost as though normal traffic it was as if the protocols that were instated were just not enforced at all. So I will say that it felt like, at least my school, I can't speak for other schools in Miami-Dade, a lot of what was done was simply done for show.
Ooh.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's why we want to have this conversation, right? Because you guys are on the campus and only you can tell us what you're living, because we get to see as adult providers and advocates, we're seeing what you just said, the show, right? We're seeing, this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to do. But how can we hold people accountable if we're not actually hearing from the constituents, for lack of a better term, the people who are actually living it? So I guess my question then to you, Robert, is taking everything you just said, what are your fears going back in this year with now an even more contagious variant and almost 100% of the school back on campus? And then Issa, I'm coming to you.
So I would say my concern is that we would be doing precisely the same thing. I actually went to school a little bit earlier today in order to help. I'm part of the announcements, so I was filming a little bit of what the school year would be like. And from what I saw, it was almost the exact same thing. We have an administration change, so maybe that would result in some kind of better enforcement. But right now it's looking like we're almost going to have the exact same procedures, but it's going to be amplified by the fact that 40% of the school is coming back. We have half of a grade who has never even been to school due to being virtual, the ninth graders that are now there. My middle school is also part of it's a 6 through 12 school, so we have middle schoolers part of it. So these younger children are obviously not going to be following it if they feel like they don't have to. They take a little bit of liberties, especially with the masks. I just feel like it's not entirely safe, but at the same time, I feel like I don't have much of a choice. So I'm going into it and I'm crossing my fingers.
Wow. Thank you so much, Robert. I think you really painted a picture for us that we don't always see on the outside. So Issa, you want to add to that, your fears? What did you feel, this past year, and then now getting ready to go in? Similar question for you, and Pedro, we'll come to you in a little bit, okay?
Well, when I came in, honestly, I had chosen to come in, but my sister still decided to be at home, and my mother worked from home. So there's always that fear that if we do happen to get sick, it's my fault. Because I was the only one going outside. So I always had that. When I walked into school and I was there for like 2 weeks and I was quarantined already. And I was like, oh my God, like, who was it? Like, did I ever come into contact with them? And thank God throughout this entire year, I did not get positive, but there was always that fear because somehow I would always sit next to the person or someone close to the person that was positive. So I'd be like, oh, gracias, Jesus. So it was just all that. I was scared. My school, on the other hand, was actually very strict when it came to this stuff. When it came to lunch, like Robert said, it was like every other seat, and the security guards, if they caught you, like, slacking, they'd be like, no, go back in your seat, you can't just do that. If they, after you ate, you had to put back on your mask. So if they didn't see anything on your plate, they'd be like, put on your mask. So it was actually very strict like that. Like they said, it was like a one-way hallway, and that I did find some people who weren't really respecting that, but my school's a big school, so it was like very, like, I had to be on time for class and everything, so there was that. Going back, I feel like, of course, there's that issue of safety, but it, like Robert said, it's just so much more better to work in school, so there was kind of like that battle with, like, am I being selfish concerning for my education, but not worried about other people's health? And that was something that I always thought of, like, how can I just like go every day to school and focus on like my learning, and what if I just endanger everyone else? And I don't really have like older people or younger people I hang out with, but I do have friends and close family who have toddlers and babies. So I was like, God forbid I like ever passed it on, it would just be horrible for me. But my school made it more strict as that I felt safe to a certain extent, so it wasn't anything dangerous like that. But I think the school year, it was pretty good for my year. The 6 years they came in, they knew what to do, because like Robert, mine is a 6 through 12 school, so the middle schoolers really did pay attention. Everyone paid attention. It was until the end of the year where it started getting more lenient, and they even passed like that one day mandate where you can take off your mask outside. But then that completely like went off the wall and was like, no, we have to be strict again.
So what are some of your fears going in, considering that your school, hearing from you, did a pretty good job maintaining the rules, the protocols? What are your fears going in now with 100% of the school, because virtual is no longer an option? Do you have any fears? And of course, I want to be very fair. Many of you attend some of our most elite schools, right? So we're really going to talk about Robert's perspective about the social justice portion of it, because there is a question of privilege, right? That certain other kids may not have. There are some real conversations that we need to have that I'd love to hear your perspective on. So I'll let you answer that question, Issa, and then we can Pedro.
Well, like you said, I don't really have like a big fear. I still do count that my school will hold up to their expectations. The only thing I am worried is, like you said, everyone's coming in. And when we had EOC and FSA testing, there was like 2 days, like one day where everyone came in, and it was just so crowded. I felt overwhelmed. Just like, how are we really going to be able to go through this for like an entire year? And in my magnet, they put like every single person in the magnet in one class. So with just like the half capacity, we filled up the entire room. And so now if everyone coming in, it's just going to be like, how are we going to do it? But I still have like some level of faith, I do believe that we'll still be safe, but of course now I understand that there's a greater level of, danger, and how I really do need to hold up. I know there were some moments where it almost like crossed my mind where it's like it does danger to me, but now with like all the news and everything, I'm just hearing, I'm like, I have to put my best foot forward. And if I feel like another thing is holding people accountable, because I know it's really easy to see like a friend or someone that isn't holding up to the rules. And that's something that I do feel like I have to do now, that I hope other people do as well. To not be afraid to call out someone else in case like they're endangering my health or like someone else's health.
Well said, well said. Pedro, same question for you, right? What were your fears going in last year? As opposed to, or should I say, how did you balance the fear versus the need to be in person? And when you listen to what Robert and Isa said, what are your fears going in now? Full capacity, everybody's on campus. How do you feel?
So just like Robert, I noticed that online school wasn't the best for me. Like I didn't really focus that as much as I needed to. So I made the decision myself to go back to school in person. And originally I wasn't really scared because I didn't have any expectations. You know, it was the first time that we go through this. I honestly didn't know what to expect. But I feel like I kind of lucked out because my school it's quite small. It's like two hallways like this. So that said, if like half of the school was away, only like 20% of the students were in person, and that really made it easy for the administration and also the students to stay safe. Just like Robert and Isabel said, the spaces, it was like at lunch, it was like one space spaced out, and the hallways were also like one way, so that made me feel really safe. But coming back, everybody being 100% in person, I am kind of worried about how it's a small school, and if it's since more people are coming in, how will we be able to basically keep the same guidelines? You're mute.
Y'all would think a year and a half in, we would know this by now, right? So let me ask you guys, so on the same note, right? How do you guys feel about wearing the mask? Because I'm gonna kind of switch gears in a minute. So just by a show of hands, who's okay with the mask? Pedro, you kind of hesitated a little bit. What's going on there?
Okay, I understand masks. You know, it was for safety, but also being honest, they're kind of annoying. Like if it's a hot day and you're stuck in a hot classroom and you're like,
Wait, never lie. It's hot.
It's hot. But I honestly, it's just that it's annoying sometimes.
Okay, so if I use the term annoying, right? If we use your word and we go with annoying, I guess my question then becomes, does annoying balance out health?
I feel like in my situation, or I understand that my safety and my parents' safety and the safety of my friends and those around me outweighs how I feel in the situation. So I just leave the mask on. Why know everybody's not the same? And some people will be like, oh, this is not for me. I hate masks. I take it off.
Thanks. So here's my question. And I think Robert said it best, and I promised I'd be back. There's been a lot of talk about masks, right? This whole concept of masks, especially maybe it's the word mandate, that's the problem. And our politics have, in fact, quoting Robert, become toxic, right? And how do we begin to have these conversations? We're watching the news around the country, like school board members are being chastised and, you know, they can't walk out of meetings. There's actually fights, literal fist fights taking place around mask mandates. So I wanted to hear from young people. One, do you think your lives have become politicized? What's your perspective on this whole toxicity around the mask mandate? So I'm going to throw it out there, really allowing you guys to answer it whichever way you want. But the whole perspective is, what do you think the problem is with the mask, right? And why has it become so political? So I'm going to start with Robert.
I'm glad you asked this question because it is something that is very relevant, particularly in my school. I know a lot of people that would come to class and they actually cut holes in their masks, but in a way that it would like be hidden by the folds just to circumvent it. And to me, that kind of shows the bottom line of it, that it feels almost as if it's a pride thing. And I know this isn't applicable to everyone because I agree with Pedro. It is an inconvenience to me. I'm not going to lie. My school often has broken AC, and when it has broken AC, I almost break down myself. But it's definitely a struggle. But in order to cut your mask and do something like that, it feels incredibly callous and it feels irresponsible, especially given that, you know, a lot of people have to sacrifice to come to school. So in order to risk their health just for your own comfort, that feels selfish to me. And I feel like the biggest issue with it is pride. As I said before, a lot of the students here, at least in math, almost, it feels like a challenge to authority. They don't like that they're being mandated, as you said. They don't like being forced to do something, especially if they don't agree with it. Maybe they'll comply with authority that they deem acceptable, but, you know, candidly, that's not really up to them, but whatever. You know, on a personal level, a lot of people feel like they should be in control of their own health, and maybe they lack the perspective to see that their actions can impact other people. So a lot of them will see it as a transgression against their individual freedoms. I know that's something that gets tossed out around a lot, and that's something that was tossed around a lot in my school. A lot of people would argue it was their personal choice, which I can respect their line of thinking, but I think it maybe deviates from the truth. To me, personal freedom has never been about wearing a mask. I feel like that's not really an infringement on the rights they think the way they think it is, particularly when it affects someone else. So essentially, what I'm saying is that I think people honestly take it as like an ego hit when it was never meant to be that. The mask mandate is a community protection more than it is like a personal attack, you know?
Okay. So I've left Pedro for last every time, Issa. So this time I'm gonna switch it up. You're gonna go last this time. Pedro, my question to you is along the same lines of what I asked Robert. Great perspective, Robert, by the way. So my question to you is, do you believe young people have become like the scapegoat to this conversation, right? Which is making it even more toxic?
Going back, I was just gonna say it's people see it as kind of like freedom over safety. Like I can't have one without the other. Well, you actually have both. You just don't realize it. And it's not particularly just the young people. It's everyone, because if you see the news, you see constant protesters saying it's their life, it's my choice. And I understand that it's your choice to do whatever you want with your body. But the thing is that you're not just going to put yourself at risk, your neighbor at risk. You're putting whoever lives with you at risk. And not understanding that is it's that.
Okay, well said. Issa, your turn. Your perspective. I can't wait to hear the perspective of a young woman. Go ahead.
Well, I know Robert mentioned about how people brought in like rights and in a certain sense constitutional rights. And so in my school, I studied like, Supreme Court cases and stuff like this, right? And something that my teacher has taught me and I've learned is that my rights stop when your rights end. I mean, when your rights like begin. So it's like, I understand that wearing a mask is an inconvenience. And in my school, we have like 3 flights of stairs. So yes, but I also do know that there are people with pre-existing conditions such as like asthma or older people who like are more at risk to this. So it's like, it's not that big of a deal for me if you're our age and we have like, well, the average teenager who can wear this mask and it doesn't really affect them. It's just, I think it's just about convenience because it's a major inconvenience, but I think that we still can go through it. And I don't think it's fair for someone to bring in constitutional rights over something which I feel is trivial because it's a mask. I feel like it's simply out of like human decency to wear a mask. And if for some reason you simply cannot wear a mask because of medical reasons, and that's something that's understandable to me. But if it's something where you just choose not to because it inconveniences you, I can't respect that decision. And I wish they would learn and they wouldn't try to cover up that belief with my rights. Because I do believe that that excuse is something that should be used for something major. And I don't think it's fair for someone to really almost minimize that statement over a mask. And I'm sorry if that seems like, but that is something I've learned.
I think your perspective is really good. So now, again, because YAC is supposed to be representative of youth throughout Miami-Dade County, right? Because you guys represent different sectors. Do we feel, so let me start by asking this question. Are young people watching the news?
Definitely.
Everybody's shaking their head. Yeah, I can tell you that many adults feel no one's watching the news. These kids don't watch the news. They don't care. They don't. So I'd like for you, and all of you are shaking your head. I'd love for you guys to kind of educate us as the public and the adults who may be watching this, the impact that the news has, regardless of what news you watch, but clearly it's coming across. You're getting the information, and how is it being processed? So let me go to Robert.
So yeah, I've spent a lot of this Zoom kind of dissing my classmates. I hope I didn't come off that way because I really do respect them. And one way that I especially respect them is that a lot of them will cite the news. So I'm really excited to talk about this because I feel like that's such a trope that's thrown around. So as soon as you said that, my eyes almost rolled back into my head. So many of us are constantly reading the news, watching the news, and discussing it each day, like a step further, having like critical thinking conversations about it. We have a class last year that was for juniors called Global Perspectives. And there wasn't like a preset curriculum or anything. There was just a test at the end of the year. So a lot of times we have kind of like free periods. So what we did a lot of the times was like between students, just like bring up news things. We'd be like, hey teacher, did you hear about this? Can we have a discussion about this? Like one day we were just talking about like the ethics of electronics, which I think is so cool. And like, it feels like our generation doesn't get enough credit. I think we very much understand the importance of critical thinking. And
I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes older generations will be like, oh, young folk and their phones and their TikToks. And it's like, no, but we can read the news on our phones, that, and we can talk on our phones to each other about the news. So they don't realize that it's a device and a vehicle to broaden our perspectives as much as it is for entertainment. It has tons of uses. And not just our phones, but like when we see each other in school, a lot of those conversations are taking place, even if they don't know it because they're not there directly. But yeah.
Very well said. Isa, so are people watching the news? And according to Robert, not only you guys watching it, you're processing it, you're discussing it. Is that the norm, right? Or is this because you guys are at some of the best schools in the county? Or is it just the norm, right? Because there seems to be this, as Robert says, there's this preconceived notion that young people aren't watching the news, nothing really matters to them. They're only on the phone to do TikTok videos and Snapchat and all this other stuff and, all the challenges, the latest dances. But having worked with young people for the amount of time that I've worked with young people, I dare to challenge that. Because the conversations that I have, and even in this time, right, in a time such as this, young people feel very strong, whether it's about the vaccine itself, whether it's about the mask, whether it's about virtual learning. Young people have very serious and like they're strong feelings about all of these topics that you guys, as Robert said earlier, are not often given credit for. So share some of that with me.
So I definitely do agree. Everyone is watching the news. I know TikTok is like, oh, it's like memes or like dances, but I've gotten most of my news from TikTok. And of course, I researched more, but a lot of people have used this as a tool. And it's really amazing because like a lot of these issues, like all the movements that went on, like BLM, there was one that was like cancel porn, cancel animal cruelty products. The things that's going on in Afghanistan right now, just everything going on in the world. So many people know this because of these social media platforms. And so it is kind of annoying when anyone, it could be anyone that just says how we are always on our phones, always on TikTok, watching like memes and stuff. And it's like, we've opened our eyes and like we really do know things. I know I keep on talking about this teacher, but this teacher, I praise her. She really speaks about how you need to be aware. You really do need to know things. And she says how it's really important to look at the news and to form your own opinion. So I know a lot of news sites could at sometimes be politically biased. So I've learned from her to always look at the full story and to get your own glimpse of it, and to not take someone else's perspective of that. And I think teens are doing that. Teens really are getting the full story and they're not being sort of like politically biased or anything. And they're making their own decisions because they're capable. Like Robert said, like we can critically think, we are always looking for more, and we do want to understand all these social injustices and everything. So I think my generation, like this generation, really is more incorporated into the news than like ever before.
Pedro, when you're home, are we talking about the news? When you're with your homeboys, are you talking about the news? What are we talking about, right? And how do you, so now that you guys have all told me we're watching the news, and it's funny because I'm always telling them that too, like our young people are watching the news. Our young people get it, they're watching us. And I guess the question, and you guys are really enlightening both providers and adults, and the methods in which the media is being delivered to you is getting to you outside of the traditional cable network, your local news. You guys are seeing it on social media, right? So my question then to you, are all young people really taught? Because the reality, like Issa just mentioned, what's happening in Afghanistan. There's a perception with adults, those kids aren't watching anything about Afghanistan. They don't care about Afghanistan. So they don't know about anything about mandates. We're just going to tell them that they have to wear a mask and that's it. Is that true?
You brought up a word that I want to point out, traditional. And I speak a lot of this with my father. He says how, or just in general, how adults, they see that we're not looking at things their traditional ways. So their immediate thought is, oh, they're not doing this, or they're not aware of what's going on. But they don't realize that our phones or our devices are kind of like our golden ticket to the world, because we get through Instagram, or the news, TikTok, through almost every site. The news always finds a way to get to our devices. And we, or I myself, also with my friends, always talk about what's going on, because I also, it's mainly on Instagram. That's what I mainly use. But every single, like lately, every single post I've been seeing and every story is just what's been going on in Afghanistan. So it's Instagram, right? It's an app that is used to upload pictures, to like see memes, but also kids, my friends, we're talking about the news and we're trying to share it with everybody else.
Great point. So Issa mentioned something that's kind of going to lead me into my next part of this conversation and roundtable that we're having. So you mentioned that a lot of times you guys are watching and you're monitoring, like if BLM puts something out, or products, certain products that are not good for the environment, what have you, social justice issues. Clearly, we realize that COVID has become a social justice issue. And what do I mean by that is because of COVID, COVID just highlighted a lot of what we already knew, right? The injustices, the inequities, the disparities from how we handled virtual school, right? Who was able to get laptops versus who had to be on waiting lists, Okay, so you got the laptop, but were you actually able to do the work on laptop? Did you have that capability? Were you able, was there a language barrier? The multitude of issues. So my question now becomes, because COVID itself has become a social justice issue, all the way down to the vaccine. Well, let's start with the testing, right? Because there was a conversation about areas that were able to get tested first. Some who were able to afford it, the wealthier got it before those that communities that were less affluent. So my question now is about the vaccine. Even with the vaccine rollout, we saw a lot of that. So there's been a lot of conversation around young people being vaccinated, 12 and older. Teens between the age of 12 and 17 are able to get vaccinated. What's your perspective? Do you feel that this is part of the social justice? And I'm going to ask Pedro this one first, because I'm going to leave this for Robert. I mean, that's right up Robert's alley with the social justice. Because there is this real perspective that Black and Brown communities don't have the same, not perspective. We know that it's factual, right? Your zip code dictates your education. It dictates the type of health you get. And clearly we were able to see this, and we highlighted, it even dictated who was able to get, the right types of loans during COVID, right? So my question is, we cannot pretend that COVID-19, the testing, the vaccination is not part of a greater social justice conversation. So my question to you, when we talk about vaccines, how do you feel about young people getting it? Are you okay? How do you feel about disclosing whether or not you have been vaccinated? And do you feel that this is a furtherance of social justice issues, furthering the inequities and the disparities that we see in our communities? That's on you, Pedro. And then I'm gonna go to Robert. Sorry.
Honestly, I feel like one, it's every parents, like not just parents or the education system, to teach us about what's going on and to tell us you have the right, if you want to get the vaccine or not. But honestly, it's just no word. Could you restate the question, please?
Do you think that this whole vaccine is because there again, we're back to the politics of vaccine, right? We're back to this politics. So mask mandates is political. The vaccine, we've made it political, even though we have all these other vaccines that kids have to take in order to go to school. Do we think that we have politicized health so much, right, that the whole COVID-19 thing is in fact becoming a social justice issue?
Oh, definitely, for sure. Because actually recently I read somewhere, I don't remember if it was here in Miami or in New York, where certain restaurants weren't letting you in if you were vaccinated or not. And that has become kind of like a stigma or a stereotype, or like, oh, you're vaccinated. This is a chip placed by the government, and it's kind of like another diffusion or another obstacle in between people.
Growing the greater divide. Great point. Issa, and then I'm gonna finish with Robert on this one. Issa, your opinion.
I do agree that our health has been politicized. Like Pedro, I also heard how there was like vaccine passports, how you had to be vaccinated to travel. And I kind of have conflicting views on that, because I do understand how maybe someone couldn't afford the vaccine, can't get to the vaccine, and wants to travel, like anything like that. But I am in support of the vaccine in a way. How I'm glad that it's being in work, and I'm glad it's able to like help other people. The one fear I did have was if we're moving too fast and like there's on a testing, like we don't really know a lot about like the side effects of things. So when they're saying that you can get the vaccine to like a 12-year-old, I'm happy that they have the ability to, be safe. I just hope that it's like fully tested and it really doesn't endanger them in the future. But with the whole thing being politicized, I feel like, unfortunately, it's just people in power who want to get to the convenience of people. So it's like they have these certain ideas that's like, let me get this idea, and hopefully conveniences people enough that they will follow me. I feel like COVID has really highlighted that. Unfortunately, that does happen to be the case. So it's kind of it hurts how people have kind of taken this whole health into political extremes. I always thought that like wouldn't help be the most important thing. Like why must we put our pride over our health and other people's health? That's what I always thought. And hopefully we can overcome that, but I honestly do unfortunately feel like that could be the truth.
Well said. So Robert, this is up your alley. I know how much, just even while we were trying to get to know each other, I know how much, how much you care about social justice issues, right? And one of the words that you used when we were speaking earlier was the concept of interconnection, right? Being able to connect social justice and connecting these dots. Here we are. So not only have we politicized masks, we've politicized testing, we've politicized vaccinations, who gets it first, how they get it, the whole 9 yards. Do we believe that COVID-19 will further, is this just another issue that will become a social justice issue?
To me, what I've seen over the course of this pandemic is how quickly COVID is becoming an issue for the poor and the alienated groups of society. And I say this on a US scale, but also on a global scale. As vaccines are rolled out to more affluent communities first, people of privilege are able to go out of their way and get those. You see the more impoverished communities and maybe the people on the side, the people of color, are getting limited rollout to it. So as society is quick to, drop the quarantine and stuff, go back to work, those that are vulnerable, that have still not been vaccinated, those that only received one stimulus check and were not able to sustain themselves fully and are now homeless because of the pandemic, they're getting left behind in the dust. And I'm seeing no recourse for them at all. There's been no real talks of any progress for them. So right now, the biggest thing that I've been seeing is it's becoming a disease for the poor. So I think that's the biggest way the pandemic has been politicized, is that it has become a way for the ones on top to reaffirm their superiority over the ones on bottom and enforce this hierarchy that has existed for a long time. And I say that because it's most prevalent on a global scale when you see countries like the US, which have pretty high vaccination rates, even now with the Delta variant. And you have countries predominantly in Africa, you have in Eastern Europe, that the vaccine rollout is nowhere near as insane as it was in America. And instead of, using their insane amount of resources to help propagate, some kind of progress for these countries, the ones at the top, which I will say is the US right now, in terms of vaccines at least, are just kind of sitting pretty. It feels almost as if this is kind of like history repeating itself. I don't know if I'm phrasing it correctly, but it feels like the US does not want to see the rest of the world return to normal and are kind of selfish in this situation. So that's just one way that I see it politicized. But of course, within the US, you see the same transgressions happening. I mean, you see businesses are already expecting you to get back to work. They say the pandemic's over, when, let's be honest, looking at those numbers, that's far from the case. And you have those people that simply cannot go back to work. They are much more vulnerable, but they have maybe 3 kids at home and they're getting paid minimum wage. So if they want to sustain their children, they need to go back to work. And it's getting impossible because were affluent and could have survived the pandemic, based on savings. They got the vaccines first and they're now back in work doing just fine, really minimal risk. They have to risk a little bit, but they'll be fine. Those that are in tougher situations are now struggling here because they're risking their lives to survive, it's just insane that there's this dichotomy within the country, and that same dichotomy is echoed throughout the world. So that to me is the most prevalent case where the pandemic is being politicized. There's many other facets, but that was the most predominant one. I think you're muted, Dr. Khan.
Yeah, you're mute.
I keep telling y'all, you used a word that several of you have used throughout this conversation is the word privilege. So if we agree, right, listening to you all, if we agree that COVID is going to become or is currently a social justice issue, right? The haves and the have-nots, from the rollouts to virtual learning to income to childcare, and the list goes on, right? Then my question to you becomes, as we prepare to go back to school, how do we see that privilege playing out in your school, right? Because clearly there's a lot of young people that are not going to take this vaccine, either because they don't want to or their parents don't want them to. What's our message? Is there a message? I guess is really the question, because is privilege, as it always does, it always pokes its head. Will privilege become part of this conversation with this back to school, I guess, conversation, for lack of better terms? And I'll start with Issa this time.
Privilege, I feel like, has always been prevalent in the school system, whether it's hard to hear or not. You know, it's always the students who have the resources that can get on top. Students who have the ability to go into internships and clubs and to other organizations where you have to pay fees, and with parents who have the resources to go to like top schools. It's always been about privilege. And I feel like the pandemic has highlighted that in the sense that it's more heartbreaking, and how you said before, and I'm sure other people have said, how impoverished communities and even countries who simply cannot, you know, like it's not normal to have Wi-Fi in every single household, unlike the US. It's not normal to have a technological device in every single household. And these families, these households, you know, they've had a major setback in education. Like maybe they could have possibly gone the entire year without any like education at all. So going into school, I honestly don't know how they're going to be able to do it, if they'll have to repeat the grade or if they'll just go up and not understand any of the material of the previous grade. And so that's something I really do hope can be, you know, brought up in situations. I really do hope that these people in power are aware of this, because I'm not sure if the vaccine will be mandatory. Is it mandatory? I'm not sure yet. If it is, I do hope that they can take into contact that some people can't get it based on their economic stance. But I'm not sure if they will take that into account. But I just hope that, you know, these people do understand how some people were put in less unfortunate positions during the pandemic.
So as of now, vaccines are not mandatory. They're not mandated, but they are vast and they're everywhere. You don't just have to go to your doctor, Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, everybody and their mama giving the vaccine right now, right? So we saw a plunge, and then we're seeing an increase in vaccines, right? And vaccinations right now throughout communities. But you raise a valid point that I'm gonna go to Pedro about, is the concept, and as we talk about the privilege and it really rearing its head in the coming school year, you raise the concept of what people are calling now the COVID slide, right? So we generally have a summer slide. So imagine many kids have been out of school since March of last year. They went through the summer slide, they came back to the school year in a virtual capacity, which is now your COVID slide. And then we went back into a summer again, which adds to the summer slide. So I guess my question to you, Pedro, is the gap, the educational gap that we are definitely going to see, that Issa raises, is a valid point. Do we consider that as part of this privilege conversation?
Yes. First, I want to go back first to what we were speaking on privilege. I'm Dominican. I just got back from a trip to DR. I just want to bring in that like foreign country into that point of view into this conversation. That privilege is like it does weigh a lot, because of being over there, I realized that a lot of my friends that live over there have unfortunately failed their school this last school year because they don't have the privilege, like Isabel mentioned, or I believe it was Robert as well, to have Wi-Fi in their home, to be able to connect or have those resources. So they unfortunately failed. And the gap it's I I've been talking about it with a few of my friends because I have a friend that stayed online the whole time this whole past year, and that they told me that that kind of causes anxiety in them. They worry about how will they adapt, coming in into an obviously very much different environment than they left.
That's a great point. And as soon as Robert is done, I really want to talk about, again, the mental state that COVID has left our young people in, right? There's a lot of anxiety, but we're going to get into that. So you kind of led me exactly where I wanted to go next. So Robert, I want you to address the privilege conversation, right? The COVID slide, some communities are going to see 5 months. Black and brown communities, research has already told us, is going to be anywhere between 9 and 11 months of, of slide, of missed education. And clearly that's going to lead to the school to prison pipeline and ultimately gun violence in our communities, right? So again, I come back to you because you kept using the word interconnected, and I want people to understand that the reason we're having this discussion today is because young people understand that COVID is going to have connections and negative impacts on their lives for a very long time. So address the privilege conversation.
Yeah, so firstly, I want to say that it's staggering to me still that people don't see how much of our world is connected. And like you said, there is the school to prison pipeline that it starts when people are young. People aren't innately made into a criminal. There is a lot of societal like upbringing. There's the argument for nurture, that a lot of how the environment you were raised in does lead to who you are as a person. So I think that, with that said, regarding the pandemic and how they handled online classes, I will speak to how my school handled it. So I will say is that online classes were kind of like second classes. So the way my school handled it was teachers were assigned physical and online classes, and often at the same time. So you'd have a teacher teaching to a classroom of students, but then in the background, their computer would be running, broadcasting them. So the way this worked out was that those who were at home online were pushed to the side. Often minority voices were drowned out. Most of people who were in person, physical, were the center of attention, the focus. So that contributes to the slump that you were describing, where everyone who was at home kind of felt, okay, I'm not being heard, I'm not being given attention, I might as well just not try. My efforts are being wasted. Why even purposely do anything? So it's a lot what Pedro said. A lot of these people didn't even have Wi-Fi at home. So they aren't even given the chance to try in the first place. And it's a combination of these two factors that made it feel like those who stayed online did suffer in a way that those who were privileged enough to go to the school did not. And now as the new school year is starting, it feels as though that mix is going to leave a lot of students behind. And again, push out even the already pushed out alienated groups, and keep those who have maintained success in power. And to me, that feels like it's doing a disservice to the Black and brown voices in our school who simply could not go to school. I want to paint a picture of a student who, let's say, has an immunocompromised sister at home. She cannot take the bus to school because she's afraid she's going to catch COVID, where we know for a fact they were putting 3 students per bus seat, which is opposite of social distancing. I mean, that's crazy. But she can't take that bus. Her mother can't give her a ride because she works on the opposite side of town. So she had to go to online school. Suddenly, she's receiving a second-class education. She has to take care of her sister in the background a little bit, make sure she's staying on track. She's putting herself second, and the school is putting her not even second, putting her third. The student is now way behind on her own studies and is not getting what she deserves as a student. Don't you think it's a little obvious that she's going to grow up thinking, okay, the school system didn't care about me, and maybe go down the wrong path? It feels as though that pipeline, as you put it, is not talked about enough, that these students that are being alienated feel encouraged to be alienated. It feels as if that's what society wants them to be. It's not something that they're doing on their own.
Wow, your answers your answers are pretty powerful. So that following exactly what Robert said, and I said Pedro led me into the next point, if in fact we utilize the same example that Pedro just gave us, right? This young person, I can tell you exactly what Robert said. I have heard multiple times throughout the past year. Whether it be parents couldn't do it, so the big sister, big brother, because when we talk about some of these inequities, right, and these disparities, you had language barriers, you had technological barriers. There were parents that just could not navigate the technology because they didn't have, they don't know how to. You had students who know how to use the phone, but didn't know how to send an email, and it was used against them, or their ability to navigate 5 or 6 different platforms to submit assignments. The Wi-Fi component that we continue to talk about on this conversation. I had students say to me, I had to be mom. I had to take care of my older sister since I was the one that understood technology. I had to be the one to help them with their homework. By the time it was time for me to do my homework, I was exhausted. I didn't get it. So I went from being an A or a B student to a D student, and no one ever checked on me. Or I missed a couple of days of school. The school never called to find out what happened to me. So these were calls and conversations that I was having throughout the year. Hence the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, because the underlying issue for me in listening to these conversations and in listening to everything you guys have said so far, we cannot pretend as though there is not a mental health component to what's happening, right? So I think Isa mentioned the anxiety. Pedro mentioned some of the isolation. Just the conversation by itself, if we use Robert's perspective, how do we think this young girl feels? Right? Nobody cares. So if nobody cares, why do I need to care? I really want us in the last 5 minutes that we have to spend some time. We're going to do 3 things to wrap up. One, we're really going to talk about this mental health piece, right? And how we think your generation and the students, your peers are digesting all of this. 2, what is your advice for some of your peers that's getting ready to go back to school? And then I want to kind of leave the last couple of minutes for you guys to just make some open statements, whether it be about vaccination, how do we do better to take care of one another? I'll let it be comments that you guys, sort of like your closing comments, okay? So Pedro, I promise, since you were the one that kind of led me into it, let's talk about that. How do you think this is impacting your peers in mental health?
I just want to point out that it's a thing that's been going on since like the very beginning. It's not like over time it's slowly developed. Since we first got the computer, since it was junior year, last year, students, like we said before, teachers, when we were all online, teachers would, of course, pay attention to all of us, but still it's the students themselves that don't feel like they want to reach out, or they kind of like it made school feel optional, because it was like, oh, it's computer, I could just leave it there, let her rant on, let the students talk, let the teacher talk, and I'm in the background listening to it. But let's be honest, were they really listening? When you're at home with your phone or with whatever other device, distracted by, that could be an option, or like a student with a phone, or like we said, having younger siblings to take care of, parents not being there. So that over time, over the course of a whole year, it caused, I know students, or I have friends that went through this situation and now have anxiety to go out, are depressed because of it, because all the pressure at home is going on to one student.
Isa?
So I know I mentioned before how when we're working on Zoom and we have our laptops like in our room and stuff, we basically combine school life / work life to home life, and how there really was like no breaks, how it was really easy to just lie in our bed, which is meant for like rest and sleep, and do classes and do homework on it. And I know that I never really got a break per se, because it would always just be like, I would always have my homework in front of me. There would never be a time where I could just take that away. It would always just be hanging in the air. And so I feel like that really did cause a lot of issues. I kind of felt like I felt dejected. It's like, am I doing enough? Like, for a while, I had actually stayed virtual and I did not understand what they were saying. It was really hard for me to learn. I had to learn like interacting. I know a lot of other students who simply cannot learn from like a video. They have to be able to interact with other people. And that idea, how it's always just watching, 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 it kind of is like you can't digest the information. And so you don't understand what you're doing. And then you go to do your homework and you don't fully understand it, or you just don't understand what's going on. And so that made me feel like, what am I doing? And I had walked into this in freshman year. So I just been plunged into high school and like I didn't know what I was doing. And I know other people may have gone through like harder years. I know junior year is a harder year with like SATs and it's like really harder classes. And I know people who were going to senior year and they had scholarships in colleges. And so we were all kind of, well, most of us were put into like this position where we were in a new environment and there wasn't a lot of guidance. It was all just virtual. And there was like that wall where I can't reach out to my teacher personally for help. I can't reach out to like a counselor unless I through an email. There's kind of that barrier where we can't really connect with other people that we do need help with. And that kind of just puts us in a position where it's like, what am I doing wrong? Or like, will I ever be doing enough? And for a while, I feel like a lot of people could think to just give up. Like it's just hard, and it's like, why keep on going? And it kind of took away that beauty from high school and just school in general.
Wow. So before I go to Robert, some of the terms that I heard was, I feel isolated. I feel like the school let us down. I feel like nobody really cared. I heard parents just don't understand. Parents thought that this was a vacation, right? I heard young people say, my escape was really school, right? From everything else that may be going on at home. I heard young people say, my ability to connect with my friends, that was my therapy. So when you put me in a house where things aren't good already, or I don't feel like I belong, and now I'm stuck in this house, I feel even worse, right? We know that the data shows us that there have been more calls for suicide hotlines. There have been more calls for just help in general. So Robert, as one of the seniors on here, how do you think this impacts particularly you and Pedro, who are rising seniors, who we pray will get through this year? And what impact do you think it'll have when you all getting ready to go to college?
Well, first off, I want to say Isabella's answer was really well put, but I think I speak for a lot of us when I say that it feels like the second pandemic was mental health. It was COVID and mental health that we were all dealing with. And I think that it is really hard, especially spending, the better part of 2 years dealing with COVID, going into high school, because it almost feels as though the last 2 years of your high school are supposed to prepare you for the rest of your adult life. Pretty soon I'll be going off to college and I'll have to start being independent. But a lot of people take these 2 years to kind of let loose and have fun while also working hard. And, if I'm being 100% honest, it feels as though that opportunity was robbed of me. It feels like we got all of the work with none of the play and more work on top of that. I think a lot of kids, as silly as it may seem, look forward to stuff like pep rally, homecoming. These are like silly American rituals, but they're also really great stress relievers. And even if you weren't into that school spirit stuff, you had time to spend with friends, parties. A lot of those things were effectively pulled out from under us. We were given no time to prepare. And as I approach my senior year of high school, I find myself applying to colleges that I will never have visited. Talking to people that, who knows, I've seen maybe like 3 weeks in person. I have a lot of friends that went online and I haven't seen them since like sophomore year. It's just sad. To me, that's the biggest thing, that I feel very helpless. And a big thing about me is I love giving people agency and I love having agency. And when it feels like that's been taken from me, and there's nothing I can really do about it, it hurts. And I guess there's nothing better to do. But I think maybe the hardest part about it is that there really does feel like there's nobody to talk to about it. Of course, I'm grateful for platforms like this. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Planton. I'm very grateful for like platforms like this where people can come forward about these issues. But in school environments and even sometimes in like friend environments, it feels very hush hush. Like sit there in silence and pretend like everything's okay. And to me, that's never really been how I roll. But I feel like it's almost been forced onto me this year.
Right.
Because you do have to remember a lot of people have it worse. But I think maintaining that perspective is good. But you also have to remember that everyone has their own story. And, empathy in times like this are extremely important. You can maybe never see somebody's struggles or strife. It's very easy for them to put on a happy face. But I think we all just need to be more understanding of each other, I guess, is the first step forward. But the pandemic definitely contributed a lot to it.
Wow. All of your answers were amazing. And I think you guys really gave voice to what your peers, young people like yourself, are going through, right? How you see things, how you process things, what you're living, how you really felt about this. And one of my goals has always been, and I like to call myself like the youth whisperer, right? I get it from the youth and then I take it over to the adults like, look, we're doing it wrong. This is what they're thinking. This is how they're feeling. But I didn't want to end it on a sad note. First, I hope that this is not the last time that I'll have you all on or we can all do something. So I'm going to definitely follow up with the trust about that. But I didn't want to end it just on what we have experienced the past almost 2 years. School starts Monday, right? What's the advice? How do we get through it? Assuming, fingers crossed, we don't have any additional disruptions, right? Quarantine and disruptions and all this other stuff. What's the advice to your peers to ensure that they too, that we can all, exactly what you just said, Robert, be able to extend that empathy and apathy to one another, but also, I'm gonna use a word that a friend of mine likes to use often, to show grace, not just to each other, but to show grace to self, right? This is hard. And I want as young people for you guys to know that there's an adult, there's several of us. In fact, there's many of us who fully understand that this is hard. So my advice to you is I first want to extend the opportunity to say, have some grace with yourself, right? You're young people. This isn't supposed to be easy. The adults don't know what they're doing. So I know y'all don't know what y'all doing. And the people that y'all are looking for guidance, let me tell y'all, they're just as lost as us, okay? But on a serious note, I just really want for you guys to have some grace with yourself, show yourself some grace, and thereby being able to extend that grace to others, because that's how you guys are going to make it through. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity. If you had one or two advice to give to your fellow peers starting school on Monday around COVID, around everything we just talked about today, what would that be? So I'm going to start with Pedro. You've been a little quiet.
I know a lot of times things can like crumble onto you, or like you have one thing to do and then another comes up and then another comes up and you feel like all that weight, you're all under all that weight, you might crash. I feel like the best thing I can say is to take one thing at a time. That's like my best advice. To analyze, know that you're not alone, you're not the only one going through it. Find your friends or people who are going through the same thing and speak with them. It's always best to speak instead of keeping everything inside of you.
Well said. Robert?
I love coining terms because they make me feel important. But one thing that I'll say is I feel like mental egress is one that's really cool. What I mean by that is basically getting out of your own head and back into the real world. So I feel like personally, I know I can be my own biggest critic. And if I'm suffering, I'll think to myself, okay, why would I burden anyone else with these problems? They're my problems. but sometimes the biggest help that you can get is from an outside source. So don't be afraid to reach out. That's just something that I still struggle with a little bit, but if you share your problems with somebody, it can help you feel heard. And I think that's the first step to healing a little bit. Just knowing that you're not crazy and what you feel is valid and can be validated by others. So means of talking to other people and simply relating your problems to them. And even better, sometimes they'll have advice for you and you can work on it. I think that's the first step to healing yourself mentally, spiritually, all that.
Well said. Isa?
I think that people should know who they are. Like they should know the type of person that they are, in the sense that like I feel like with the whole COVID thing, it's really easy to kind of lose yourself. So I really do hope that people can like still be who they are. So like under stress, still find their hobbies, still stick to their hobbies, the things that they like. I also want people to know that their strengths and weaknesses, because I know of COVID, a lot of my weaknesses showed up. So I really do hope that maybe people can identify like a flaw, like, oh, you procrastinate a lot, or you tend to like push your things to the side. So I feel like if you identify that, I really do hope people can better themselves and grow from the slump that they had last year. And to be also, honestly, to just take what they learned and apply it to themselves to grow as a person.
Well said. So we're coming down to the last thing. And I am not one to, so we've had great conversation. We've gone around, we've talked, I've asked questions, but I really want to prompt you guys. What's your closing statement, right? With everything that we've just talked about, I want you to make a closing statement about your feelings, whatever you want the statement to be. This is your opportunity. So I'm going to go back to Pedro.
I over time I've realized that patience is very, very important. That problems, well, some might, but they don't always just go away the next day. So you need to be patient with yourself and be patient with those around you as well. And if there's a problem that you can't fix, focus on something that you can and start there.
Well said. Isa?
I think to persist, to keep on going, even when it really does look bleak at the moment right now, to really do think for the future, and to think that if you keep on going and you really do believe in yourself, that it will honestly just come into fruition in the future. Like everything that you work for, it will come. Like you will get that recognition, maybe that prize, maybe that thing that you wanted, you worked hard for, it will show. But I do hope that people can look past the situation they're in right now and to just keep on fighting.
Robert? Well said, Isa.
Yeah, very well said. So I think it's interesting that we're all kind of picking virtues here. I myself will say that I think it's important to have hope as a virtue. Pretty tangential to Isabella's, because, you know, if you're having resilience, it's also sourcing from hope. But I think hope is distinct enough to deserve its own mention, because particularly with, you know, how a lot of the discussion has been centered on our phones, we do have so much information at our fingertips, and it's so easy to see the destruction and death in the world. I can load up so many videos and articles about what's going on in Afghanistan right now, and it's very easy to waver, you know, and feel a sense of personal guilt for not doing enough. But I think hope is important to have, because if you have hope for a better future and maybe a little bit of optimism, then, you know, that's the best thing you can do to build it. I think the first step is always mental. So if you believe that you can, then you can start to do it. So that's my message.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I am truly honored that you guys accepted our invitation to come on. I want to extend a huge thank you to the Children's Trust, particularly the community engagement team, especially to Daniela. I also want to go to the extent of saying, this is an open platform. Use us. We want to bring you guys back. We want to hear your voices. We want to be able to make sure that not only you're in the room, you're at the table, and that your voices are definitely left in the room, right? It can't constantly be that we're making decisions and we're not listening to the people who it's absolutely impacting. I also want to say two things before I leave. The title of the show was Youth Voices, COVID and Back to School. To anybody who thinks COVID is not real, COVID is real. So as you guys prepare to go back to school, I implore you, wear your masks. If you need to have conversations with your parents to get vaccinated, let that be at least have the conversation, right? It's a available conversation. But I also want to say, you all are our wildest dreams, right? It's so cliche to say you're the future, right? Because we can sing the Whitney Houston song, "We Are the Future," I believe the children are our future. But the reality is you guys are really the hope and dream of this community. You're the hopes and dreams of your parents. But more importantly, you all will be the movers and shakers of this community moving forward. Please know that I am extremely proud of you. Please know that there are people standing in your corners championing for your success. And Robert, I want you to know, I'm here to listen. I'm here. If U-Turn myself can ever be of any assistance to the YAC or to either one of you, please don't hesitate to utilize us. So as we wrap up this episode of The Turning Point, I want to thank everybody who has joined us. I want to thank Robert. I want to thank Isa. I want to thank Pedro. I want to thank all of your peers who will be watching. But more importantly, I wish each and every one of you a healthy, successful, and covered school year, okay? Because it's going to take a lot of covering, whatever you pray. I ask that you pray it hard, keep yourself sanitized, social distance, whatever you need to do to stay alive and to stay healthy. I encourage you and I implore you to do that. I thank you to everybody who's watching. Thank you for watching another episode of The Turning Point. We will be back with another episode, hopefully with some more young people addressing relevant and current topics that matter to all of us in our community. Thank you, and you all have a great evening. Bye-bye.